Hello and welcome to From the Ground Up. My name is Margaret Staudter. I'm the Registrar and Site Archaeologist here at Fort Ticonderoga, and this is our first episode of From the Ground Up, where we begin to look at some of our archaeological collections here at Fort Ticonderoga. Now, our first episode is going to be looking at pipe stems. As you can see in front of me, I have quite a few pipe stems here, and these are part of our undocumented on-site archaeological collection. So this is a collection that we have at the fort that is archaeological objects that were found during the early 20th century restoration of the fort, and they hold no ground provenience. So we don't have any context as to where these came from, but we do know that they were found here on the site. Now, pipe stems are one of the most common artifacts that come out of archaeological contexts in the 17th and 18th century, and even into the 19th century. And it's because, one, tobacco was very popular and smoking was very popular, but also clay pipes were very easy to mass produce. Now, clay pipes are also very fragile, and that is why we have lots and lots of little bits of clay pipes stems here. In these bags, I actually have over 1,000 different pieces, so there's quite a few. Now, pipe stems are, and pipes in general, are very datable based off of a few different attributes. There's the bore size within the pipe stem itself, there's the shape of the bowl, the size of the bowl, different stamps or markings that can be on the bowl or the pipe stem itself, where you can date them to a specific person in time and place. And in the case of these pipe stems, we have three different sizes. There is a 4/64 of an inch, there is a 5/64 of an inch, and a 6/64 of an inch. And as you can see here, the largest number of pieces that we have fall into the 4/64 of an inch category. Now, there was a archaeologist named J.C. Harrington in the mid 20th century who, through studying pipes, began to notice that there was a trend where larger bore sizes were prevalent during the sort of early introduction of clay pipes, so your 17th and early 18th century, and then they get smaller going into the mid to late 18th century. So our larger bores here, our 6/64 of an inch, represent pipes that were maybe made a little bit earlier or were still being used even in the context of the fort. But as you can see, most of the pipe stems we have here have a bore size of 4/64 of an inch. Now, there's a lot of different attributes, as I mentioned, for these pipe stems that we can look at, including bore size, as well as some different stamps and maker's marks that can be found in them. So we're going to take a look at some different examples from our collection here. So to start off with, here are two undecorated plain pipe stems from our collection. The majority of our pipe stem fragments are plain and undecorated. In this case, we have two different sizes. There is a 4/64 of an inch bore on top that has that much thinner pipe stem, and then below it is a 6/64 of an inch, which has a thicker pipe stem. And the production of clay pipes went through a mold. You would have your blank, your clay, your kaolin clay, and that would be placed into a mold, and a piercing rod, an iron wire, would be placed up through the pipe stem where it would meet an iron stopper, which was forming the bowl, the shape of the bowl on the pipe. And as time went on, that thicker stem that needed the thicker bore then transformed into having a thinner stem and a thinner iron wire that could go through it. Now, that's not to say that we don't have thicker pipes in the 19th century. We actually have a few examples where the pipe itself has a sort of thicker size to it, and it's still either having a 4/64 bore, and some of them even have 5 and 6/64 bores as well. But for the most part, by the 18th century, you have a lot of these thinner stems, like the one on the top, being produced with that 4/64 bore. Now, the white color, this kaolin clay, which when you think of pipes in the 18th century, you think of these white pipes. Kaolin clay is originally named from the region in China where this clay was being used to produce ceramic vessels. And with that introduction to the European market, that clay was actually found to be found in Europe and in Britain as well. So that clay is then being utilized by the 17th, 18th century into forming these very sort of iconic white pipes. And the clay is very cheap. It's then going to a cheap market for the production of pipes. And with the molds meant that we could produce thousands and thousands of these from continental Europe and Britain and then introduce them into the American market. Now, we have a good example of the bore sizes with these three little pieces, so you can see the variation. The one on the left is the 4/64 of an inch, the middle is the 5, and then the one on the right is a 6. And you'll notice in this case that the pipe stems themselves are relatively the same diameter, except for the one in the middle, the 5/64 of an inch, is actually a little bit thicker. But this is just a great example of seeing that variation in bore size. Now, while the production of pipes had obviously a lot of uniformity from going through a mold, we do have cases where there's some differences that pop up. And in one of the cases here that I'm going to show, you can see where the iron wire, the piercing rod, was put through twice. Maybe it didn't meet the side of, or maybe it met the side of the mold, bumped into it, or it didn't meet the bowl area as well, so they put it through twice. But we have a few examples where they've gone through 2 times with the piercing wire. We also have examples of little mouthpiece additions being put on. So on these 2, you can see that there's been a little lip or a sort of addition, a rim put onto the end for these guys. And that's just maybe added on later. It doesn't seem necessarily like they were going through the mold all the time. Some of them probably were placed through the mold, but they could also take a little bit of clay and add it on at the end. So we have those 2. We also have examples of where from the person using the pipe, and it might be a little bit hard to see on these examples, but I'll point it out right here and here on this one, and then on the above pipe you can see it right again, right towards the end. So the wear on these comes from the pipe being placed in the mouth of the person smoking the pipe, and eventually, if they obviously kept this pipe for quite a while, they're able to wear it down with their teeth. And we know that there's examples from the study of skeletons in the 17th and 18th century where the use of pipe stems is also wearing down the teeth of the user. So it's interesting to see that there's both wear on the pipe, wear on the teeth, and obviously that comes from the addictive nature of tobacco and just the use of the commodity in the period, the mass consumption, but the effects of that both on the person using it, but then also on the object as well. Now we have a few examples in our collection. Again, we don't have any provenience for where these objects are being found, but in this case, this pipe stem has been in some type of watery context. It's very worn, both ends of it, both the area towards the mouthpiece and then the section that gets thicker towards where the bowl would have been, are very well worn. The pipe stem itself is very smooth, so having these means that maybe they were being deposited in a well or maybe near the lake, but we don't exactly know where they're coming from, but they have had some contact with water. Now, as I mentioned, most of the pipe stems in our collection are plain and undecorated, but we do have a few examples in our collection that are stamped. Most of them are stamped with the place that they were manufactured. In this case, we have Scotland, and then we have this one that has Gouda wrapped around it in a stamp, as well as some little rouletting design. But you can see it starts there with a G and then wraps around, and the A disappears a little bit at the end. But that's made in Gouda in the Netherlands, and Gouda was one of the largest production centers of pipes in the 17th and 18th centuries. And even into the 19th century, the mid to late 19th century, Gouda is still producing a lot of pipes. And these 2 examples have that name. We don't necessarily know any further information about them, but we do have 2 other examples with a little bit more specific information. This one here, a 19th century example, has a Muhlenbach on one side. It's cut off, and then when it gets flipped around, you can just make out the Wald, and this is for Thewald. So Muhlenbach and Thewald was a pipe production company started in 1830 in Westerwald in Western Germany. And we know too that after a certain point they started stamping their pipes with M&T instead around 1848 after that year. So this pipe probably was dropped on the property, or produced at least too, between 1830 and 1848. And again, since we don't have any provenience, can't really date this to a ground context, we can date the pipe from the manufacturing details that we know. Now, the most common example of stamped pipes that we have are Peter Dorney pipes, and I have 4 examples here. We actually have quite a few more in our collection. The most recent one we found was during the restoration process that we're in of the pavilion, which is our 19th century home on the property. We found another Peter Dorney stamped pipe stem. And here are the 4 examples. This one I'll turn, because you see the Peter on one side and then there's Dorney on the other. And there's a lot of research with these guys. They're found throughout the United States. They are produced definitely in Gouda, most likely being copied from an original manufacturer that's coming out of France, but they are most popularly coming out of Gouda and being distributed then around different sites in the United States. So again, these coming into our property in the 19th century during the period when we have lots of travelers coming to visit the ruins of the fort, and also the pavilion in the 19th century, the mid-19th century, was being utilized as a hotel. So that's when these guys are definitely being used and then dropped or broken on the property. Now we have, as I mentioned, quite a few pipe stems in the collection, and we're really just doing a big kickoff with cataloging now our archaeological collection. So as we go further with these and we find updated information, we will definitely share them. We'll definitely be sharing these objects too as we get them cataloged and then put onto our online database. Thank you for joining us for our first episode of From the Ground Up. To learn more about upcoming programs and events, please visit our website at www.fortticonderoga.org and check out our Center for the Digital History page. You can also join us on social media through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I look forward to seeing you next time, and thank you for supporting Fort Ticonderoga.